Hello everybody. I'm putting a video together here to show you all how to write up an application that adds a series of numbers up and takes an average and then shows the highest and lowest values. And this is similar to your assignment for the chapter 3, first assignment 3A. And I just want to show you something similar just to kind of give you some help in terms of how you would code up your first exercise there. So the way this application should work is that you're going to type in a number here and you're going to click Add Bill, and then it's going to put the number into an array inside of JavaScript internally in memory. And then you can continue to add bills, and every time you do, it'll clear out the content of the text box, and then when you hit Show Results, it will take up what you have basically and calculate the average. It'll also show you the highest and lowest values, and then it'll show the individual bill amounts in this text area down here. So in looking at the source code will actually go between lines 8 and 9. This is my HTML file, and while I would normally separate these into two separate files, one with a JS file, one with the HTML, I'm just putting them together here just to keep things simple. So I have my style sheet and my HTML file, and as you can see here in the body of the document, we have a section, we have a header, and the instructions in a paragraph here. And the basic controls that the user will interact with include the text box, which actually should be called bill, okay, instead of score, so I changed it here to bill. That's your text box. And then you have a button named add, whose value is add bill, so that's what it's going to display. And then another button whose ID is set to display, and that's going to show the words show results on the screen. JavaScript interacts with HTML elements via their IDs. So anything you need to interact with needs to have a unique ID associated with it. So in the results area, we have an average bill text box, high bill, and a low bill text box, as you can see here. Those text boxes are not designed for the user to put things into, so it might be useful to gray those buttons out, gray the text boxes out, or either gray them out or prevent the user from typing into them, some technique like that. Or you could just make labels there too. The nice thing about text boxes is that they stand out a little bit better, but then you've got the individual bills label and then a text area below this that says results for its ID. And then inside of that you have, well, right now just a space, and then we'll fill that up with information. So that's the HTML. Let's go ahead and take a look at setting this thing up. So we know first of all that we're going to need a variable here to hold the bill amounts. So I'm going to create a variable called amounts, and I'm just going to set it equal to, just temporarily here, use open and close brackets to indicate that it's an array that we're dealing with. And the other thing I want to do is I want to set up the $sign function. Now the reason that they do this in the book, this is a function that makes your code look like jQuery code, so that when you type in a $sign and follow it up with the name of an element, that syntax is what jQuery uses. And so they're doing that to make it easier to understand what's going on. Right now, you might be thinking, why on earth do we have this function called $sign that we're using? But once you see jQuery, it will make a lot more sense. So this function here between lines 11 and 14 is that helper function that enables us to reference an element by a $sign followed by its ID in quotation marks. So we need to, first of all, wire up a click event for the Add Bill button. We also need a click event for the Show Results button. So those are the two button click events that we need to catch and handle. So with that in mind, we're going to come over here and create two variables. The first one we'll call add click. And we'll set that equal to a function. And at this point in time, I'm going to stub this function out. What I'll do is I'll put an alert in here. It says add was clicked, just for testing purposes, so that when they click the button, I want to see that alert pop up on the screen. Then I'm going to make another function here called display click. And like the first one, I'm going to put in here display was clicked. Now, these are wonderful, beautiful looking event handlers, but they're pretty much useless unless somebody calls them. Particularly, the button click action calls the event handler. So in order to hook up the button click event to the event handler, we need to code up another event handler, which is an onload event for the window being the browser. So window.onload is an onload event that occurs in the window, and when that happens, when that event occurs, we want to call the function that I just put together here. So basically, the code between lines 27 and 29 will run when the web page loads up onto the browser screen. Well, what is it going to do at that point? Well, we need to wire up our event handlers here. So we're going to take our add button and we're going to say, look, when the onClick event occurs, please call the add click function. So quite simply, when they click the button, specifically the add button, the onClick event will occur. This line here, line 28, will instruct JavaScript to call add_click when that occurs. Similarly, we want to do the same thing with display. And wire up that event handler there. And then, as long as we're here, when the page comes up, we want to put the cursor or give focus to the score. That shouldn't be called score. It should be called bill. Okay, we want to set the focus on the bill text box, which is this one right here. So, to do that, in my onload function here, I'm going to simply put in the name of the text box, which is bill, and then I'm going to call the focus method like that. And that will give it focus. Now to test what I have so far, I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back to my browser, and I'm going to refresh it, and I'm going to test it out. So if I click add bill, it says add was clicked. If I click show results, display was clicked. And if I load the page again here with a refresh, you can see the cursor is flashing inside of the bill amount text box, and it's also highlighted in blue. So this is what you see, by the way, running Firefox in a Mac running OS X. So I know I'm good so far. Everything's working at this point. So now what I need to do is implement the add function. So when the user clicks the add button, what do I want to do? What I usually like to do in cases like this is I like to put the things I need to do in as comments and then start filling in the code below the comments. So the first thing we want to do here is get the bill amount from the user, which essentially we're going to be getting that from the text box. And then we want to check the amount to make sure it is valid, which in this case really means a greater than 0. And then we want to store the amount in the array, and we'll put that in, and then we want to clear the text box and give it focus for another entry to make it easier for the user to get the values entered. Now when the display button is clicked, what we want to do here is, first of all, calculate the average. We want to calculate the highest bill, the lowest bill. Then we want to display the individual bills. So that's basically what we need to do. And I'm going to put a comment in this onload of the window here just to hook up the event handlers to the appropriate events. It's kind of obvious that we're doing that, but I'll just put that comment in. I won't put a comment in on line 45 here because it's we'll assume that that's obvious to the user. So those are the steps for each of the click events, what I need to do. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start writing the code to do all of this work. So first off, to get the bill amount from the user, what we need to do is create a variable, and I'll just call it amount, and set it equal to the name of the text box element. And since it's a text box, we need to access the value property of that text box element. Now, because the bill is, the value they're entering is numeric, we really don't want to do it exactly the way you see it, because that assumes it's just going to be stored as a string. So what we need to do here is we need to call the parseInt function and pass the bill value property into the parseInt function. That will basically convert that string into a number and store that number in the amount variable. Now what we need to do next, because they may have messed up here, they may have put in an invalid number, or they may not have put anything in at all, or they may have put in some gibberish like text. So we need to do an if statement, and what we're looking at here is the amount, first of all, equal to an empty string. If that occurs, they didn't put anything in, and that's a problem. We're going to use the Boolean OR, which means if any of these conditions are true, we have a problem. The next problem we could run into is if the amount is not a number. So we'll for that use the isNaN function. And it's NaN, capital N's on both. So that checks to see if it's not a number. Then we need to look to see if the amount is less than 0. If any of those happen, we have a problem. So if that is the case, we're going to put up an alert that tells the user you must enter a name, you must enter a valid amount for the bill. Something of that nature. Right? And I can return at this point right out of the function, so it'll basically stop and go no further if there's a problem. Now, if all is good, in other words, if they put in something that's valid, then these three conditions will prove to be false, and therefore the code between lines 23 and 26 will never be run, and it will simply skip down to line 29. So at this point, I know that I have a valid number. Now what I want to do next is go to my array, my amounts array, and I want to go to the next available element. Now, at this point in time, I have nothing in the array. It's completely empty. I'm going to put a 0 into it, so I have something in it, okay? So now it has one element in it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to reference the array's length. Now, because I put the 0 in the array, it has a length of 1. There's one element in the array. The thing is, arrays are always indexed starting at 0. So the little trick I'm using here is I'm going to index the amounts array by 1, because amounts.length is equal to 1. Now, that essentially means the second element. But as you can see, there's only one element in the array at this point. So by using the length of the array, I actually am accessing or attempting to access the next would-be element of the array, which doesn't exist yet. But it will exist if I set that particular element equal to the amount. So I'm going in and I'm saying, look, take that amount and set it equal to the next available slot or element of the amounts array and store it there. And that will do that for me. Then all I have to do is clear out the text box, the bill text box. And so I'm going to clear it out by setting its value to an empty string. And then I'm going to assign it focus like that. Now, actually, I'm going to do that also here in the alert. So if they goofed up, I'm going to, if they screwed up, I'm going to tell them, and then I'm going to clear out the value. Well, I'm going to clear out whatever was in the box, okay? And then I'm going to set focus to it again. So either way, I'm going to do that. Now, when you see this kind of situation where you're duplicating code like this, that tells you that it's probably you could do a better job of structuring the code. And I'm going to show you that is indeed the case. And I'm going to make a change here. So what I did is I added an else condition to my if statement, so that if these things are true, it's going to put up the alert. Else, it's going to store the amount in the amounts array. Either way, I want to clear out the bill text box value and set focus to it. So because I'm doing this in either condition, I'm just going to put it underneath the if statement sequence so that it will always do it no matter what. And that way, I got rid of the return statement. So what's going to happen if you look at this from the top down, it's going to get the amount. It's going to test it to see if it's valid on line 22. If it's not valid, it will run line 24 and then clear out the text box, give it focus. If it is valid, it will execute line 29 and store it into the array. And again, clear out the bill text box and set focus to it. So if I did this the right way, I should be able to go here and refresh my screen, and I should be able to enter a number in. You can see it's clearing it. Now show results is not working anymore, and that's because I got rid of the code in there. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to put an alert back into it called test, because what I want to do, I want to make sure that I didn't break anything, that the code is running properly. So if I enter a 45 in here and hit show results, it comes up and says test. And that tells me there are no runtime errors or syntax errors in my JavaScript. If that were not to do anything when I clicked the button, then that would tell me that there was an error in my script somewhere, and I would have probably just bring up Firebug in the browser and try to find it. But I know I'm okay at this point, or at least the code is working, it's running. Something good is happening. So I'm going to go into the display click next and get that taken care of. So to calculate the average of all the bills, I need to have a sum. So I'm going to create a variable here to do this, and I'm going to create this variable and call it amount total. And I'm going to initialize it to 0. Then what I'm going to do is get into a loop here for variable I in amounts. That construct, which is a loop, will traverse the amounts array one element at a time, and for every element it points at, it will name it I. Essentially, I is essentially a pointer pointing at the element that it's looking at as it traverses the array. So what I can do with that is I can simply say amount total equals itself plus amounts sub I, like that. And that will add up all of the individual amounts and put them in a sum. So then the average is simply going to be the amount total divided by the number of amounts, or bills, essentially. So I can go to the amounts array and check its length here and use that to calculate my average. So I got my sum divided by the number of items in it. Okay, so now I got my average. Okay, so how do I calculate the highest and lowest bills? Well, there's many different ways to do that. One way that's commonly used is to create a high and a low variable, basically. And what you do is when you're calculating your sum inside of the loop there, if the amount that you're currently looking at is greater than the high amount, the high score, whatever you want to call it, in this case it would be the high amount. So if the element you're looking at is greater than the high amount, it becomes the new high amount. If the element you're looking at is lower than the low amount, then it becomes the new low amount. Now, this only works if you initialize the low amount higher than the high amount. Otherwise, if they're equal, the logic won't work right. So I'm going to put in a number that's a high value here, that's unreasonably high for a bill. Now, this isn't the safest approach in the world to use, but for our purposes, we will just do it this way. If you really wanted to, you could enforce a maximum amount and set this value higher than that. But I'll just do it this way for now. So just make sure that you set the low amount higher than the high amount initially, and then your logic will work out. So that logic will, by the end of the loop cycle here, the high amount and the low amounts will be set properly for you, and as well as the average, which you calculate after the loop. So calculating the highest and lowest is really done inside of this for loop. So I'm going to move the comment up here and just put that there, and then I'm going to get rid of these comments down here, and then displaying the individual bills. Well, first of all, I want to put in the values for the high and low. So I'm just looking for that here. Okay, average bill, high bill, low bill. So I've got average bill, high bill, and low bill. And I'm going to be setting values Now the first one is the average, and I'm going to round this to the nearest integer, so I don't want to see any decimal numbers in my average. So I'm going to set average.toFixed with an argument of 0 to say no digits to the right of the decimal. I don't have to do that with the high and low amounts because they will be integers. Well, let me rephrase that. They will be whatever the user typed them in as. So if they gave me a number that had a value out past the hundredths place, that would be kind of dumb, but it would show it that way. And I'm not really too concerned about that. I guess if I wanted to, I could say .toFixed and put a 2 here if I wanted to just ensure that it went out to the hundredths place. And I guess that doesn't hurt to do, so why not? We'll just do that. Okay. And let's see, average, high, and low. Okay, then as far as the individual bill amounts go, I'm going to need to make a loop for that. So I'm going to start the loop counter I at 0, and I'm going to continue until I'm going to continue as long as I'm less than the length of the array. Which, if you think about it, let's say you had put 10 bills in, your amounts.length would be 10. So your loop would continue to run as long as I was less than 10. But since it starts counting at 0, it's going to go essentially from 0 to 9, which gives me 10 iterations, which is exactly what I need. So each time through the loop, I'm going to make a string here, which I'm going to call text display. I'm going to set it equal to nothing, and then I'm going to come here and I'm going to say text display plus equals amounts sub I dot toFixed 0. That gives me my number. And then I'm going to concatenate a carriage return onto the end. So as this string gets built, it will put the amount in a carriage return, an amount in a carriage return, and do that however many times it needs to. Then, once I've done all of that, my text area is called results. So I'm going to go to results, and I'm going to set the Now, with the text area control, you have to actually do this a little differently. There is no value I set for this, or any property for that matter. I want to take the actual content between the opening and closing tags, and that's what I want to change. So what I have to do for this to work is I have to go to the first child, and that would be the content, actually, the thing in blue there. And I have to get that value, the value of that content, which is a node. So I'm going to say firstChild.node value equals text display. And that's going to essentially put the text into that text area for me. Or at least it should. That's the goal that hopefully will happen. And when that is finished, I'm going to go back and do it here. I'm going to go back and set the focus to the bill again, like that, so they can continue entering more data if they'd like. So let's see if this works. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to add 2, 6, and 8. I'm going to click show results, and you can see here my average is a 4, and then I have 8 and 0. Now, I never put in a 0, so why is the 0 showing up? Well, it's showing up because I initialized the array with a 0, if you recall, at the very top. So how do I deal with that issue? How do I get rid of that problem? Well, it turns out I put a 0 in that array initially. I don't have to put anything in the array. JavaScript is smart enough to figure this out, and here's how it works. If I set this amounts equal to an empty array, when I add my first bill amount in, this is the line that does it, line 29. Well, because I put the brackets there, the length of the array is 0 when I go to add the first item. Amounts.length is 0. Well, 0 would be the first element, so it actually works. I can take the amount they typed in and put it into element 0, and it will work. So I don't need to preload it with a 0. So knowing that, then, I can come over to my browser, and just to test it out here, I can put in, let's put in some better values this time. 98, 123, and then 215. And if I hit show results, you can see that my 3 values, and then you can see the average, and then the high, and then the low values. Now, yeah, I put the 2 fixed onto 2 on that, so they show up with 2 digits even though they didn't enter them that way. So probably, well, I think I'm going to get rid of that 2 fixed on the high and low amounts. And so let's just do this. That way it's just going to be simpler. So I'll put in, well, that's okay. Let's put in some numbers. And then show results. I get integers here. Now if I go in and I put 23.4 in there, or 2.56, it actually rounds the values. It actually truncates the values, is what it's doing. It's chopping off the decimal portion of the number. And it's doing that because when I enter the value in, it parses it as an integer. So there's no way I'm going to have any decimal values to display. Therefore, I didn't need the .2 fixed set down here when I created or when I display those values. They're always going to be integer values. So entering decimals, it just ignores the decimal part of the number. So that's in a nutshell an example here of how to interact with JavaScript and a web page. Again, the key to it is you have to create a window.onload event handler, which is a function, and hook up your button event handlers in this case there. Then you have to write the functions, which are the event handlers themselves, and then you have to code them up to do what you want them to do. So I'll put this example out in the Blackboard area where I posted this video link, so you can take a look at this, and I hope you found it helpful. Thanks for watching.